and introduce this topic. So most of you probably saw this on Facebook or in my weekly emails. I think this is the fourth of these conversations we've had with diocesan leaders, but also some of you are practitioners, which is totally good as well. And one of the things that continuously comes up in our conversations, and our being my conversations and those that the Task Force for Church Planting and Redevelopment is having with dioceses, is that there's uncertainty about what role diocesan leaders, bishops, canons, etc., ought to be playing in the work of church planting. Sometimes I hear this in the form of fear that if they get too involved or show up too often, they might stifle the creativity. And nobody wants to do that, right? On the other hand, one of the biggest concerns that many of our planters have is that they don't have the support that they need from the diocese. And so there's this back and forth of communication that it feels like it's helpful to have. And Janet, who's the chair of that task force and a diocesan leader, and has worked with several church planters and redevelopers, is going to give us some observations and thoughts and wisdom about this topic. And Janet, I'm glad it's you.
Well, it's all of us together, and that is the first thing, right? Church planting and redevelopment is a team sport, beginning to the end. And so, and we need on our team, not just the church planter and the canon or the bishop, but everyone. And in a diocese, that all involves often the bishop and diocesan staff being willing to run a little interference for the church plant. Because we run into a lot of situations where folks are a little bit intimidated by the new kid on the block. You know, people are afraid, oh, this is the favorite child, this is the new thing. And so there's this tension around how to bring everyone to the table around a new good thing. So, you know, there are lots of, and I'm sure a lot of you have wisdom around that, but that is an important place to start, is that it's a team sport. And it's not an exclusive team sport. So you can, you know, the table is big enough to include everybody. So that's the first thing I would say. The second thing I would say is it's an adventure. And if you and your leadership are the sort of team that likes to have everything tied down at the beginning, this is going to be really challenging. And I think all of us would agree that it's really important not to make promises you can't keep. So, you know, you want to have things kind of nailed down a little bit so that you have some direction and some clarity, but it is an adventure. And so part of the covenant that diocesan staff need to have with the church planter is that from the beginning, everyone understands that this is probably not going to go. In fact, it's definitely not going to go how you think it's going to go. However you think it's going to go, there will be X factors. And so counting those in from the beginning as an adventure rather than pretending they're not there and then treating them as a disaster is probably going to serve you well. The third thing is, and this is going to go kind of against what I just said, clarity is really, really, really important. Who is going to be involved? How much money is it going to cost? The answer to that question is always more than you think. How long is it going to take? Current wisdom on church planting is around 7 years. So, you know, when folks come together at convention and they want to start something new and they want to give it 3 years. That's something that's really good to have a conversation about before you get on the floor of convention. Because it is likely that it's going to take more money and more time than you think it should. But that clarity around where, how long we expect it to take, what kinds of signals mean that we need to change this up, we need to think about the possibility of a different direction. Think in advance, what are the markers of we think this might not be working? And what are the check-in points along the way so that at 1 month, at 3 months, at 6 months, at 9 months, you have some shared expectations of the kinds of things that are going to happen, and then you can hold each other accountable to those things. Accountability for church planting is a two-way street, which means that there is accountability on the part of the planter to follow through for grants for the Task Force on Church Planting and Congregational Redevelopment. They're required to have a ministry plan. And everyone hates that document. I have not heard anybody say, oh, goody, I get to fill out the ministry plan. But I've heard many people say we are well served by thinking all of those things through. And so if you're wondering about the component parts of a church plant, that ministry plan document hits a lot of the important things. And you'll notice in that document, for example, it assumes that you're going to have a core team because you're going to need one. And if you've got one solo person, even if it's a really dynamic, awesome person, clergy or lay, that's not over the long haul going to it's not going to make a ministry. And in fact, if it's built totally on one charismatic person, and after 7 years or 5 years or 10 years, that person is called to something else, then the thing will collapse. Because if it's really that much about the charismatic leader and not about ownership by a team, it won't last. I mean, it may be a great flash in the pan, but it won't last. So clarity around all of those pieces and re-clarifying all of those pieces is going to be really important for your success. That doesn't mean, clarity does not mean lack of flexibility. Clarity means we know where we're starting and where we think we're going and how we think we're going to get there. And then we're going to articulate what's working and not working and make adjustments that we're actually talking about and not just presuming somebody is hopefully thinking about. So those are the 3 places I would start. Jason, what's the next, what is a key thing that I have not yet mentioned?
Gosh, I think that those are actually really great points, and I would actually say that you kind of continually need to cycle through those things. That you need to continually come back to them. That's part of the flexibility versus planning piece. Is that you need to be able to have points where you come back to where it all started, so you can say like, okay, what have we learned now? What of our expectations and our planning needs to be adjusted for moving forward? And so those checkpoints. Jennifer Allen just put this in the chat, and she's right. Coaching is a big piece of this. I think one of the things we've learned is that coaching is a real requisite piece. You really need an objective outsider. And sometimes that's for the diocesan leadership, but certainly for the church planter, like the objective outsider that can ask the person, what's next? What are you doing next? What's the next goalpost? What does that look like to be completed? Who's going to hold you accountable to that? When is that going to get done? Not somebody that necessarily, and it doesn't have to be somebody that has all the content and has lots of experience even in church planting and starting new communities, but you certainly need someone that can demonstrate a belief in the planter and the diocesan leadership, if you choose to have coaching for both parties, and help people articulate what lies ahead that needs to get done, and who's going to help us get that done, when is it going to get done, and who's going to hold us accountable to that.
Thank you, Jason. I think one of the things that does having a coach in the mix allows you as a bishop or a canon or another diocesan staff person to come alongside the church planter and their team in the role that I think only you can play, which is pastor and supervisor. I mean, let's face it, you've already got a, so you don't need the coaching one. It's quite frankly, it's too labor intensive for most of us as diocesan staff and bishops to really be tuned in, especially if we've got a bunch of these going, to be the coach. So it's good to delegate that piece so that you can listen into what's happening, come alongside and just be curious. Why did this happen? Why did this not happen? Not the same way as the coach, right? Like, hey, we got things, but like, stepping back from that part to say, oh, well, maybe we didn't dream big enough. Maybe we dreamed too big. To just kind of be a safe harbor for that conversation. We have started on the task force for church planting and congregational redevelopment. If a congregation gets a grant or a church plant gets a grant, we require that the person who oversees the congregational development church planting person and somebody from the finance office, as well as the church planter, hopefully their coach, and maybe somebody else from their ministry. We require those folks to get together with one of our leaders from the task force, and Katie, who is our staff officer for church planting, and have a conversation about what expectations are for this ministry. And our hope is that covenant conversation is not the first conversation that the diocesan staff have with the planter. And our hope is by far that is not the last conversation. Because if it is, the church plant probably will not survive. This is unapologetically a labor-intensive ministry mission endeavor. And if you feel like you have to apologize for that with your congregations that are kind of what I'd call continuing congregations, then I would invite you to think about what that might say about the culture of your diocese, and what do you need to do to help contribute to a culture that is going to help ministries to change and thrive. Because if a church plant is being throttled in some way, it's likely that new things in congregations are also getting throttled.
Janet, kind of going back to you started off talking about that responsibility of diocesan leaders to help explain the presence of a new worshiping community to the rest of the diocese. And you touched on that just now as well. I mean, it's reminding me of, I have two daughters, and before the second one was born, we had to read all these big sister books that explain that you might not get as much attention as you did before when the new baby is born. And I certainly saw that happen with the Abbey, my church plant in Birmingham, that for the first year or so, the college ministry across town and the Anglo-Catholic parish within 3 miles of the Abbey were They weren't antagonistic at all, right? But they were kind of quietly suspicious. I don't know, would you maybe talk a little bit more about that, like how a canon or how a bishop might address some of that head on, preemptively?
Head on and sometimes not head on. So Kevin Johnson is really a church redeveloper in our diocese. And I can't say enough good things about what Kevin has done with a congregation called St. Albans, which now meets in a theater, like, where you have plays. And but they're outgrowing that space, so we don't know what's going to happen with them next. So true confessions, the bishop and I are very careful not to shine too bright a spotlight on Kevin and his ministry, because it makes other kids jealous. So we encourage, I think, Kevin, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we encourage, we support anything that yes to, we say yes. And then sometimes Kevin isn't the first person that gets to fill in the blank. Because it just, people, even when there's not inequity, they sense that there might be inequity and that they're not loved as much as the other kids. And that can be a problem. Kevin?
Yes. And that's okay. I mean, I would say hopefully your church planter, redeveloper, whatever they are, has enough maturity to recognize that and to go with that flow. And especially if you're in a diocese where that's collegial. I mean, these colleagues are my friends. And so I think one of the things I appreciate is that if it's always all about me, then that makes the friendships a little more tense. And I would rather not be. So we can be mutually supportive of each other. So, yeah.
But part of that, what Kevin is saying, is that Kevin's initiation, right? He does not pretend that he is on an island, collecting cookies. He is, reaching out to his colleagues, and then they reach back. And that has affected the diocesan culture in a very positive way, because remember, this was the diocese that split. And prior to the split, clergy were basically not encouraged, allowed to really talk to each other. So this is a 180 culture shift. Jason?
Yeah, there's a few things I think might be helpful in considering this. We are a people of ritual and rhythms. And so I would highly recommend that anytime you commission a layperson or a clergy person into any kind of new mission endeavor, to look at the back of the Book of Occasional Services and use those commissioning liturgies, anything to signal to our people that God is in this work, that this isn't just the bishop on a whim and a new pet project or whatever the framing might be, but use our liturgies to your advantage to signal that this is us together. This is what God is up to. And I think that is deeply meaningful in our particular culture, an Episcopal culture, when we take advantage of that. The other thing you can do is talk about it as much as you can from your position of authority and influence in the diocese. Tell the story of mission in your diocese. All of our congregations and all of our dioceses would not exist if it were not for somebody that at some point or another was commissioned, was sent to go and start something new. And so start telling the stories in our histories, whether they are way in the past or in recent history, of us doing new work and doing new things, so people have an imagination for what the future might hold for the diocese, is really important. So give them an imagination by retelling their own story. This is a big part of what Jesus' ministry was retelling the story of Israel in a new light, to give his disciples, his followers, an imagination for what was possible in the future. So retell the story of your congregations, of your diocese, in whatever ways are possible. The other thing is that it's helpful, I think, to think about mission work, new communities, church plants, missional communities in your diocese, almost like a research and development department. Research and development is intended to take the risks and do experimentation so that other departments don't have to do that work and can still benefit from that lesson, those learnings, those new innovations. And so if you can take things, lessons learned in new work and say, gosh, you know what we've learned about evangelism in our context? We've learned this, and we would love to share this. And leveraging your communication tools and the conversations that you facilitate across the diocese to say, here's what we're learning about what it is to be the church in the 21st century from this. It does a few things. First of all, it gives, again, it's all about imagination. We don't do evangelism or mission oftentimes because we don't have an imagination for how to do that in a way that doesn't creep us out, feel weird, or is mimicking another tradition, right? So it gives people an imagination for what's possible. The other thing it does is it validates and adds value to the new expressions. Oh gosh, I'm really glad they're here and they tried that online giving, because now I really need to do online giving. And I didn't ever think I would have to do that, but because that church plant did it and I can see an Episcopal community doing that now, I feel like I have permission to do it. And I can even call that person up and say, hey, how did you set this up? What platform should I use? You did this. Whatever the opportunity that lies there, it adds value of that and then integrates them even more fully as a valued part of the diocesan family, the diocesan community.
Thank you. That is a huge role that bishops and diocesan staff play, is being chief storytellers and bridge builders, so that, you know, the new church plant needs somebody to handle the money because they don't have anybody on their core team that can do that. But the church 6 miles down the road is a big steeple church with lots of professionals in it. Somebody can probably do that. But we try very carefully not to just Jason is describing and saying, hey, and I wonder if, you know, this might be useful to you, you know, this online giving thing. So that's not something the big steeple church has done, but, you know, let me put you in touch with Kevin. He knows how to do that. So that reciprocity thing is really important. David?
Yeah, Janet and Katie, I've never been on a diocesan staff that hadn't done church planting before. I've been a church planter, but I was in a diocese that had some accumulated history and wisdom in church planting. I think it's a really high pressure place to be if you're a bishop or a canon in a diocese that doesn't have a culture for this and doesn't have a track record. And the pressure on you for success at the diocesan level is really extreme. I don't know quite how to say what to do with that, except just to own it, that there is going to be that pressure. And that one of the things to consider is talking with people like Katie and Janet and Tom, who know some of the people around the larger church, like Jason, for example, who have experience at the diocesan level and whose dioceses have cultural wisdom, and take those people on as mentors, build yourself a community of practice to help you get through those pitfalls that diocesan staff and bishops face when a diocese doesn't have an accumulated culture around this. I think it's a really tough thing to navigate. I've watched a diocese like that. I was trying to coach a planter several years back, and the diocese actually killed the new church plant over its anxiety about success. And to avail yourself of the wisdom of the larger church, I think, is really important in terms of seeking mentoring and counsel from people who've been down that road and can help you stay out of the stump holes.
Mm-hmm. David, thank you for saying that. One of the, as a church planter myself, something that it took me many months to realize was that my bishop felt under tremendous pressure for my church plant to succeed, whatever that meant. And some of the pressure, well, maybe all of the pressure that I was feeling from the bishop's office was because of the pressure they felt like they were under. They were also getting phone calls from parishes saying, hey, tell me about the Abbey, right? But I didn't know that. I didn't know that they were feeling, I thought I was the only one, right? Under the gun. And if yeah, if you're a practitioner or a diocesan leader who's going through this, I mean, a helpful conversation to have if you're at this comfort level, right, is to just go around the room as you're discerning this new ministry and say, what's at stake for you in this? Let's at least kind of lay on the table what expectations we're bringing to this and what expectations are behind you. That are going to cause you to react a certain way to success, failure, being the R&D department.
And they may not be your expectations. What I hear in what you're saying, Katie, is, you know, you may be the person who's like, yeah, let's do this. Why haven't we done this sooner? This is so awesome. Let's go. And you're in a room full of people who are like, yeah, but, you know, and this is the numbers come together and this isn't going to balance. And what if we don't have so many people? And when is it going to be sustainable? Sometimes the role of the diocesan staff person is to speak for people who aren't in the, but of whose expectations you are aware, and to intentionally bring those into the room before they submarine something down the road, so that those questions and issues are absolutely on the table. You know, I realized not long ago, one of the wonderful things that Rayford High did in this diocese when he became bishop was he said to our congregations, nothing is off the table. Now, in order for that to really, what I realized recently was, in order for that to be a thing, that sort of means that everything needs to be on the table, right? Mm-hmm. Nothing is at the table, which means we're honest about all of those things that we're afraid to say out loud. Like, what if this isn't the person, right? One of the things we've learned in church planting is it has to be the right person for this role, the right place and time for this ministry. And the combination of those two has to be symbiotic. And if you've not got the right person, somebody needs to give you all the gift of raising that question. You're a year and $100,000 into this deal. So, and there are tools that you can use, you know, assessments. All of the folks who get grants from the Episcopal Church are required to go through a discernment process. That's what we call it, but it's an assessment of their gifts for this work. And we know for sure that there are some things that if you don't have those kicks, this is going to be really hard for you. Like, you've got to have grit. You've got to be somebody who, when something doesn't go the way you think it should or the way you want it to, that does not put you on your heels. You're like, okay, regrouping, let's go. So yeah, but it's hard in cultures, and I'll just talk about my own culture. So the thing that was missing in this diocese post-split was trust. Nobody trusted anybody. So there was all of the hanging off the edge of the table. Like, and you get in a room and you think something like, I know that, like, we're not to the bottom of this, but as the new person in the room, I was like, this just doesn't make any sense. And so I know there's something. What is that something? And, you know, and I was in the uncomfortable position then of having to say, this doesn't seem like, what am I missing? What are we missing? And that turned out actually to be a gift to everybody. Now, it was uncomfortable. And some people who were trying to control things by managing what was off the table were really upset. But if you do church planting and redevelopment well, it will change your diocesan culture for the better.
I think it's worth adding to that especially when you're talking about a diocesan culture, that it can only be sustained as an initiative from the diocesan office for a period of time. It can if that is extended and that does not integrate into the life of congregations that are modeling this behavior for each other, it's just the bishop's projects. It's just the diocesan project. So, for example, in our diocese, we're fortunate to have resources that we can commit to church planting. But one of the things that the bishop and I have talked a lot about here is how important it is for our congregations to begin to see themselves as mission agencies, as church planting entities. The congregations begin to plant churches. First, we know that across traditions, churches that plant churches tend to be more successful and find their way towards sustainability and viability at a much higher rate than just when planted by adjudicatory. But the other thing is that it is a part of the culture change. So as part of something that you're measuring in the culture, what would it look like for you to incentivize, to assist congregations in going about doing the mission, not just the bishop's office being about mission? If you do actually intend for this to be a part of shifting the culture of a diocese towards mission, it has to be adopted by folks in the pews. It has to be adopted by clergy that are in congregations, and congregations themselves seeing that as their duty and responsibility to be faithful participants in the way of Jesus and faithful to the gospel and the Great Commission, in participating in mission, and the diocese helping them do that, not doing it for them.
Yes. And toward that end, let's talk about money. We are discovering with church plants and redevelopments, for that matter, that this is no longer, most congregations are not sustainable, at least for a good long time, on only one source of income, no matter what it is. So if it's the bishop's fund, that has limits. If it's local giving, especially at the beginning, that will be limited. Many of our folks don't come from church cultures of giving. They didn't learn that from their parents and their grandparents. And the third source is community funding. And so one of the things that diocesan staff are uniquely positioned to help a church plant do is to step back and say, okay, let's think about the different sources of funding for this, so that we can empower us collectively to be good stewards, and so that there's not so much pressure on the church planter to get X number of pledges in the first year. That kind of pressure really warps the relationships, I think, and it's just too much to expect a core team to. Now, I'm not saying, hear me carefully. We want to develop cultures of giving, cultures of generosity, but that doesn't happen overnight. It happens through Christian formation, which takes time. So it's something you don't want to leave out at the beginning, because if you leave it out at the beginning, people feel like it's a trick. On the other hand, you have to have reasonable expectations about these component parts, so that you really get an entity, a plant that is sustainable. I'm happy to talk more, take questions, whatever would be helpful to you all.
Yeah, why don't we open the floor up and see not just questions, but some thoughts and comments or experiences.
Absolutely.
One of the variables, sorry, go ahead, please.
Victor, and then Kevin, and then David.
Okay, thank you. But something that it's been kind of sometimes the language among, let's say, diocesan staff or bishops is sometimes kind of marked, especially when looking at church planting, marked by somehow. Let me say it the way that I'm looking at it. Is it the marked by race, like sometimes it will be like Latino, Hispanic setting will be a mission, and is due to we just start with whatever we have, and then we don't go through all the process that you were explaining now. We just find the inspiration of somebody who wants to start whatever experience in their parish, and if they don't know much Spanish, they just go in with whatever they have, and then just from the beginning, that experience is doomed to fail. And then the finances and the support and all of that is not there. So, and it's never used in the language of church planting. It's normally in some other kind of language like mission or outreach ministry or something else. So when we're looking at this world of church planting, especially today, and looking at this diverse world in which we are, it's something that enters first as a challenge for us in diocesan staff to be careful with the language we are using, and especially to be careful with how we start those experiences, especially with communities of color. And knowing that it takes time, as you're saying, Janet, it takes time. I started one experience in the Diocese of Chicago. It took 7 years for it to just move by itself. And it took a lot of defeating along the way of language, of things that were already in the culture of the diocese that sometimes people were not aware. But that part was really heavy, the part of defining that it was outreach ministry and not church planting, that it was something else apart from, and that there was a lot of conversation that we need to have. Is church planting, is not outreach ministry, is not look at how good we are with the people that are down the street. These people are part of the community, part of the neighborhood. You are just reaching out and inviting them in. And then, so I have a lot of feeling on that, because it was a lot of battles that we had to undertake, especially to bring that concept of church planting. And even now, to this point, it is still something that tends to go back to that part of outreach ministry. Oh, we are just outreaching to the Latino, Hispanic in our neighborhood. It's now, we are part of the community. This is people who are already members of your congregation as well. So it's the language is so important.
What I hear you saying, Victor, is it's partnership with, always, always, always partner, and not doing for. And yeah, thank you, Victor. Kevin?
Oh, I was just going to tag on the end of where Jason ended up in regards to, I guess, helping to shape or promote diocesan community or expectations. In my observation experience, if you can risk having a church plant and trying these kind of off the edge of the world kind of actions, when they go well, people really do start believing in the Holy Spirit, because they especially if you wrap that language in there and help people see that this is not just about a group of people getting together to start a new club, but this is the work of the Holy Spirit driven by that. And when those things actually unfold, that belief in real tangible ways expands beyond just that particular congregation. It spills out into the other congregations in the diocese. So I was just going to tag on to that.
Thank you. True. Yeah. And it's great when you have people like Kevin who will say that, right? Who name that presence in the midst of it. And it's actually more effective sometimes if it's not the bishop and the canon that do that, but it's, it's people on our ministry teams, it's clergy who are saying, oh, look, there it is. David?
Yeah, there are some variables that come into play when you're at the diocesan level, when you're considering a new church start of a traditional nature. If you're doing a mother-daughter or beehive type plant where you're going to have 10 or 15 or 20 people coming from an established church, you have a base of givers already who are conditioned to giving. If you're doing an apostolic or parachute drop, you don't have that. And it's more expensive and it takes longer. we did a parachute drop in the Diocese of Virginia, and one of my covenant expectations of the launch team members was they become percentage givers. They commit to that, to be on the launch team. Well, that percentage might be 1 or 2, and it might take several years for them to get where they were even approaching 10%. So the amount of internal giving you had just for that kind of plant takes longer to cultivate. So it takes more intentionality and more patience with something that's a cold start. And as you were saying in the beginning, multiple sources of funding. But those variables have to be taken into account when you're planning the mission plan and the budget for at the diocesan level.
Thank you, David. So I have a question for all of you. What do you need in your diocese to plant more churches? What do you need?
Can I speak?
Oh, yeah.
I feel like, and this goes to the question I was going to ask anyway. I feel like what we need is what Jason was bringing up and what David brought up, which is and Kevin, is how do we continue to talk about it and to raise up the invitation to it. Because I sit here and I think, who are those planters at heart that don't even know they are or are too afraid to come forward, and especially now? So when you ask the question, what do we need? A lot of my questions lately have been very focused on COVID-19 and the space we're in now because of this cycle, and I think we're going to be coming back to it. So when I heard last week on a planting call I was on, somebody in somebody else's diocese said, oh, this is not the time to plant a church, and 4 of us went, what? I think it is. I think it's ripe. But how do we raise that awareness, especially now? Throw up one more Zoom, come everybody who wants to talk about this. I don't know if that's a way to do it now, but I also feel like time is of the essence and we can't wait. I feel like we can't wait till we get back to where we can meet again. So that's sort of my question is, how do we really help to do that shift that Jason, you were talking about, and raise that awareness? And in my situation in New York, I helped plant a service that was vibrant, and then I left the church, and then COVID hit, and it's been dropped. It's gone. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of energy in our diocese in the fall at convention, and it was the bishop made a video about the plants, and it was very high on the priority list and awareness, and we've hit a road bump with COVID. So like now there's that. So that's all that I'm questioning.
My recommendation would be, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Is it okay, Janet, if I respond? Oh, okay. Yeah. My recommendation would be lower the stakes and find a way for people to take micro opportunities, micro risks. What if it was something as like, we've got $500 grants for you to go start a missional expression of your community with 5 or more people, and see what you learn. We'd love to know what you learn. Like, create opportunities for people to take some micro risks so they can develop their tolerance of risk, because that's part of it. Is we have a low tolerance in our tradition of resiliency and risk taking. That was done in a Lilly funded study of our tradition and our clergy a couple of years ago out of ETS. I think it was I'm not going to remember exactly all the details. That's unimportant at the moment. But create opportunities that are micro risks that lower the stakes and give people an opportunity to see what kind of life is discovered when we actually participate with what Jesus is doing in the world. This is like leaning into what Kevin is talking about. I just got off a call with a church planter this morning that was just like, I can't go back, Jason. Like, I sure hope that we're in this for the long haul, because like, I can't go back. I have swallowed the pill. I have the bug, the virus, probably a bad metaphor at this point in time, but nonetheless, like, I can't turn back. I have to do this. I have to be a part of this, whether or not I get paid to do it. I have to be a part of this. So we just need to create some low risk opportunities for people to actually get involved and try out mission and learn how cool it is to see people experience life in Christ out in the world, and to see them, the sacred and the profane, muddled up and in new and beautiful ways.
I love that, because the thing we are faced with now in multiples that was in our presence before, but now is like amplified, is anxiety. So, you know, and that will stifle innovation if you don't find a way, and often a sneaky way around it. And so what Jason is recommending is some sneaky stuff to help folks imagine beyond their fear. Because, you know, that's just, I mean, it's a fear or faith game, period. I mean, life is a fear or faith game. Church planting is a fear or faith game. Are we going to move out in faith and take a risk? Or are we going to sit in our whatever in fear and not move? And there are things people can do. I just learned recently about a church plant that's starting up in Hawaii that is starting as a group of small groups. Well, guess what? They're not going to be stopped by COVID, because they're just going to move their groups online. And, you know, and I have every confidence when this whole thing is over that, well, it won't be over for a while, but as our new reality takes shape, community will be very strong, because they've already articulated, okay, we were going to do it this way anyway. We have a vision for starting churches as small groups, which, guess what? That's not a brand new model. And so we're going to have a knitting group, and we're going to have a surfing group, a reading group, and we're going to have, and we're going to have a straight up Bible study. And we are going to inculcate in all of those expressions articulation of our loving, liberating, life-giving God. And then as we come together eventually for worship, we will have all of these relationships already formed, in many cases at a slightly deeper level, because we will be knowing this small group of people. And then we can introduce each other to.
I have some thoughts around that too, which is that there's really no better time than to risk than in the midst of when it's chaotic. When things are unsettled already, people are already unsettled, and they are, at least in my experience, the unsettledness allows more room for risk and new things and trying new. It's when things are going well and everybody's the same and the expectations are normalized that people push back against risk and new.
Todd?
Sorry, I was just waving goodbye to David, who was saying
Oh, okay.
he had to go. Sorry. Certainly didn't mean to cut you off, Kevin.
I think this Zoom was set for an hour and a half, but we don't have to continue to go that long. I can hang around, but and I think Katie and Jason are scheduled to hang around, but also all of us are on a ton of Zooms. And so if you need to go, don't feel bad about it. And know that we are here as resources all of the time. And being resources because we know we don't know. So if we don't know, we'll help you find somebody who does know, or who can at least have the curiosity conversation with you about, I wonder, what if, shall we imagine together those conversations that can get us to the next place when we don't know, and not knowing in this particular kind of ministry.
Were there any other responses to Janet's question? What would you need, or what would your diocese need in order to plant more churches? I do want to kind of invite you. I love that question. And I want to invite you to keep thinking about that as you go back to your diocesan offices and out into your church plants or established congregations, wherever you are. And please be in touch with us, with me or Janet or Jason or anyone else you know on the task force for church planting and redevelopment if you have some answers or further answers to that question. Yeah, I think that this task force is really moving in this triennium from just trying to support what already exists to beginning to show possibility. So whatever ways that we can help with that, please let us know.
Okay.
Any other thoughts? Good. Well, we are all zoomed out. So just let me close by saying we're going to have one more of these online conversations. The next one will apply to some of you, maybe not all, but it will be with Reverend Canon Jesus Reyes in the Diocese of El Camino Real. He'll be leading a conversation on language-specific and ethnic-specific church plants. Honestly, I think that some of what he may give could be relevant to anyone planting in a culture maybe that is not dominant or not your own. At least I'm really hoping for that. So please join in. He's worked with a lot of planters. He's worked with a number of redevelopers. So bring lots of conversation and questions for him. That will be on June the 9th. Same time, same place. Good.
Katie and Janet, I'll throw out something here. I was trying to think of it. It's a fantastic question. What does our diocese need to plant more churches? I have no clue. I have no idea right off the top of my head an answer to that. What we are beginning to really grapple with, and this is not a question of, whether you, I'm with, was that Gina who said, someone said now's not the time to think about church planting. I'm completely in agreement with you on that. That's crazy. I don't think there's a time to not think about church planting. But COVID-19 and this context we're in is sort of like a personal health crisis in your own life. When you adjust behavior, you adjust values, and you adjust beliefs. And so we're kind of waiting to see how that really shakes out with our parishes. We have higher collaboration than ever before. We have churches coming together for online worship. We have churches experiencing new methodologies through online worship and gatherings. We have laity as well as clergy really engaging the why do I exist question for the first time in a long time. Because for the moment, the crisis has taken them out of the normal zones. And so I'm really interested in the conversation going forward, because we do have on our agenda to plant churches, but we also now, whether we really want to or not, have on our agenda helping churches through the end of their life as parishes, and I hope helping shepherd them through some really deep and good collaborative merging and consolidation of vision and resource around our shared mission. So, I mean, it seems like it's all tracking together, but it's going to be interesting. And it's not on hold. We have to engage it right now and be preparing for it right now and working towards it right now. And I love, for that reason, the phraseology of micro risks and micro trials. And a lot of what we do in Zoom and online are micro risks right now. I mean, we're gathering 8 to 12 people, because past that it's just a zoo. So how are we really, engaging that and taking the learns from that? But nothing's on hold right now, but we're still in the health crisis. So we're not going to really be seeing a lot of our dietary changes yet on scale, but they're coming, and we're having to learn new reflexes and muscles through this time. And I think some of those will be the answer to that question.
Yeah, so thank you. That bridges actually. So this triennium, the task force has two hats. One is church planting and the other is congregational development. And the task force got together the end of April, and we were like, wow, we had all these plans and we thought we knew what we were doing. And then this COVID-19 thing hit. And the thing that we were pretty confident about together is not rocket science. That is, we have a lot of congregations across the church that are going to need to redevelop. And so we're in the process of putting together a throw the doors open opportunity for congregations that are interested in redeveloping to have a coach and to form small groups of congregations and just get in there and try some stuff. With some accountability from a coach, back to what Jason was saying, from a coach, and a network of support and a small group experience for those core teams from 4 or 5 congregations so that they can encourage each other and hold each other accountable along the way. So stay tuned for that, because we really think that you're right, Todd, that, and in some cases it may be that we have like 4 or 5 congregations that want to come together from a single diocese with a coach, or it may be congregations from across the church. There is something good to be said for both of those models.
Good. We're also planning some sort of like conversations this summer, but also some online conversations in place of what would have been that big Genesis gathering in this October. That maybe by then we'll know more of what questions we're supposed to be asking, Todd, and we can source those together.
Sure. We have an exciting thing right now, and Katie, we may have talked about it last year in the fall a little bit on the drive to the airport. We had a parish that had voted to close the doors and hand over everything to the diocese. So we were just beginning to spin up our gears of excitement and dreaming and visioning on planning a new worshiping community without having to go through the looking for a building and all that. So we were beginning to plan how we deal with the fallow ground time, how we prepare, how we bring other parishes together to do that. And then they backed out and didn't close the doors. And then God sent COVID-19 to close their doors. And so we're kind of back at that place with them again, and that's my reflex to make things jokes. We have to care for people because this is not going to be the only one. And so thankfully, helping folks find their new parish homes after this doesn't fall on my desk. But what we do with that building and making the new worshiping community to bless that community, that local community, does. So there's exciting stuff ahead. And we're probably going to have 16 different models for the 3 or 4 that we do this with. But something's going to stick and God's going to be good.
Yes.
So it's exciting.
Good. Their emails in the chat box. I've added you to the email list. I also put in there, I forgot to mention, not this Thursday, but next Thursday. There'll be a conversation oriented around practitioners, but diocesan leaders are welcome to join us as well. That's going to be on worship and preaching in a new community, which tends to take one form and then evolve into what it is becoming, and now even more so as leaders have had to pivot to online worship. again, next Thursday, not this one, but same time, same Zoom link, and you'll get an email reminder about that. And the full recording of this session will be up in the Dropbox and on Facebook and in my next email announcements. So you can go back and listen if there's anything that you missed.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you so much, Janet and Jason, and all of you guys who jumped on here. Let's go forth in the name of Christ.
Thanks be to God.
God.